Hi folks, today we're going to work on solving quadratic equations, and we're going to put that knowledge of simplifying square roots to work for us today. Now, when we go to solve for x in these circumstances, you can certainly solve by factoring if you think that's easiest, but in my opinion, if you have an x squared and a constant, it's much easier to solve just by getting x alone. Now, if you'll recall, we have our order of operations. So parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract, and the multiply, divide is together, add, subtract is together. So when we go to solve for a variable, we're just going to work backwards through this order of operations. And keep that in mind once it gets a little bit tougher, because that's all you're doing. You're working backwards through the order of operations. So to start out, we need to get this x alone here. So we have x squared equals 36. We want to get that x alone. Everything in math has an opposite or an inverse. So for x squared, the inverse to that would be the square root. So we can go ahead and square root both sides. We're going to work on that exponent. There's no add, subtract to do. There's no multiply, divide to do. So we can just go ahead and work on that exponent. So we're going to square root both sides. So x will equal 6. Now, since you are taking the square root and solving for x, then you have to account for both possibilities. X equals positive or negative 6. Alright, so this next example, we're going to look at basically the same type of thing. We're going to work backwards through the order of operations. There is nothing to add or subtract away from this x. So now we move up to multiply, divide, and there is this 5 that we can divide away from our x. So we're going to divide both sides by 5. So now we have x squared equals 16. The next step to getting x alone is to work on this exponent. So to get rid of the x squared, we square root. So now x equals, and since we're solving for x, we're taking the square root of a number. It's going to be positive or negative 4. So there's our answer. The graph is crossing at both positive 4 and negative 4. Over here, the graph is crossing at positive 6 and negative 6. Here we have a couple more examples where we want to get x alone. We want to figure out what it is, and again, we're just going to work ourselves backwards through these order of operations, starting down here at add, subtract, and moving up. So on this first one, to get this x alone, we just want to add 15 over to the other side. So we would have 2x squared equals 80. Now we're done with the add, subtract, so we move up to multiply, divide. So now we can go ahead and divide this 2 away over to the other side. So x squared would equal 40. Now we're done with the multiply, divide, so we can move up and go to work on the exponent, so we can get rid of that second power by taking the second root of both sides. So second power, second root, they get rid of each other, so we have x equals, keep in mind, we're solving for x, we're taking the square root over here, so this needs to be plus or minus square root 40. So we're coming out with two solutions, positive square root 40 and negative square root 40. Now we don't want to leave it like that. We can break it down, and that's the stuff that we learned in the previous lesson, so we want to make sure that we can break this thing down. What two numbers, when multiplied together, give you 40? One of them you need to have be a perfect square, so that would be 4 and 10. So x will equal plus or minus 2 square root 10. This is our exact answer. Alright, this is the answer that we want. But if you are finding these numbers maybe on a number line to graph them, then you're going to want to go ahead and switch them to a decimal, because those seem to make more sense to us than 2 root 10 or root 40. Now we're going to turn our attention to this last one, And keep in mind, we are going backwards through the order of operations again, starting down here, working our way towards the parentheses, and once we break into those parentheses, then we start over again. So starting out with this, we just want to add 28 over to the other side. So we would have 3 times the quantity x minus 2 squared equals 42. So we're done with the add subtract. Now we move up to multiply divide. So we can divide both sides by this 3, get it away from that x. So we have x minus 2 quantity squared equals 14. Now we can go to work on our exponent. So we can now square root both sides. And we need to take the exponent away. We got to figuratively pop the top on these parentheses to be able to get in there and work on them. So now the square and the square root are going to get rid of each other. So we have x minus 2 equals plus or minus square root 14. Now we can finish this thing off. Because we broke inside the parentheses, we can now start over at the beginning with add or subtract away from the x. So we add the 2 over to the other side, and there we have it. X equals 2 plus or minus square root 14. The square root 14 can't be broken down any further, so there is our exact answer. Okay, so here's your assignment, page 270, numbers 22 to 34 all, 40 to 42 all, and then 45 to 59 odd. Best of luck to you. We'll see you in class.